Hello, good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. We are live. Sorry, I made a mistake. Hearing my voice here on YouTube, what I was supposed to do. Okay, hi everyone. Apologies. So, welcome to the Cloud Security Alliance UK chapter. We're here for our fifth talk today. So, just to recap, would you go to the next slide, please? Thank you so much. Just a quick reminder on what we're doing. Just getting a bit of feedback here. Sorry. So we're here to champion the Cloud Security Alliance global mission here in the UK and make that information suitable, consumable for a UK audience. We do have a very active UK membership and we encourage you to get involved. It's all free, we're all volunteers, so we're just putting the information out there. We do engage with a broad set of UK stakeholders. We champion cloud training, education awareness in the UK. We do survey your needs, hence the reason for this whole series, Identity in Cloud. We also deliver a research program, and you can find out more on our website, cloudsecurityalliance.org.uk. If we just go to the next slide. Thank you. So as mentioned, this is part 5 of the 6-part series on identity as it relates to the cloud and zero trust. Every Tuesday, lunchtime is 12:30 for half an hour. And the next slide, please. So today's talk is about leveraging identity for zero trust. And that is presented by, next slide, please, Shruti. So Shruti Kulkarni has very kindly agreed to do a talk for us. So we're really looking forward to this one. And Shruti is a cybersecurity architect for 6.6. And she's also volunteers and involved with Cloud Security Alliance global organization as well. So Shruti, I'll hand over to yourself and we'll come off the screen now. Thank you.
Thank you, Shari. At the onset, allow me to thank CSA UK for inviting me to do this presentation. I'm very happy to be here. Let me move on to the background. At the onset, I would also like to set some context and some background to why we should be thinking about identity while we are thinking about zero trust. So in today's world, and I think ever since internet has been about, and we have had data in connected to a network, we have seen breaches taking place. So breaches aren't new. They are not going to stop. There will be breaches, and we need to accept this fact and then make sure that we are trying to either slow down or address breaches and look at how we can actually reduce the impact of a breach. And that's the background to our talk today. So, to start with, the use of stolen, weak, or default credentials in breaches, it's not really new. It's not rocket science. It's not glamorous, but it's really, really widespread. And that's because a significant number of breaches start with access that's granted incorrectly or obtained maliciously. I'm putting the word significant over here because I'm yet to hear from people about a breach that has taken place without any access that's been granted either incorrectly or obtained maliciously. So if you have encountered any breaches that did not start with access problem, then please let us know, and we would like to know more about it. So, what's the recipe for breaches? Now, it involves authentication, and then authorization, and some mistakes. Those are the crucial as recipe ingredients for breaches to take place. Now, just a little bit about authentication and authorization. It's not that you do not know about it, but it's good to set context as to what authentication and authorization mean, and then we can proceed from there to zero trust. So authentication is done with an identity. It is when we say who we are, we indeed are. And then authorization is based on permissions, wherein we can do what we are allowed to do. In between this lies the access control. Now, why are we talking about zero trust with background of access control, authentication, authorization, etc., etc.? So zero trust at the onset, allow me to set some expectations, because zero trust is an approach. It's not a technology. It's not something that is readily available. So it's a way an organization thinks, and it's a mind shift from what we are currently doing to a way of thinking about how we approach breaches. So zero trust assumes that breaches do take place. So that's why we talk about reducing the success of cyber attacks and data breaches. We do not talk about eliminating them. And then zero trust advocates risk-based access requirements. We'll see how that can be achieved in the coming slides. And zero trust promotes authentication and authorization prior to granting access to resources. We talked about earlier in the beginning that breaches take place because of access that is either granted incorrectly or obtained maliciously. So promoting authentication and authorization prior to granting access to resources is one of the ways in which we can address breaches. So tying this all up together, so we can have a risk-based decision to grant access instead of granting access based purely on binary trust of a single access control method. Now let's tie all these together into our next slide. So if we have an asset and it is on the network, we have an entity that needs to access the asset. I also want to add a little bit of a blurb over here at this point in time. Zero trust does not mean that nobody has access to anything. It is making sure that the right person has access to the right resource at the right time from the right resource, from the right device. That's what it means, actually. So coming back to this slide, when we have an asset, we have an entity that wants to access it. Now, the safest thing in this world is a server that is sitting off network, but nobody really can do business with that kind of a server. So we have assets that are actually networked. Now, when this entity wants to access the asset, it asserts its identity to get the permissions to access the resource. Now, if there is another asset in the same network, would the entity directly access the asset and gain access to it? Well, there is a little bit of a mechanism that goes behind the scenes. So we have usually an identity provider. An identity provider could be an Azure Active Directory or Ping Identity or Okta. It could be anything, or even plain old Active Directory, Microsoft Active Directory. So what happens behind the scene when an entity tries to assert its identity with an asset is that it contacts the identity provider, and the identity provider provides with a token or a bearer token or a password hash, which is then used to assert the identity with an asset. Now, and then of course get access to the resource. Now, the problem with this is that these tokens, bearer tokens or password hashes, can be spoofed or stolen. Now, anybody who comes from a Microsoft Active Directory background would know about pass the hash attacks that are a part of pen tests. So how do we avoid that? Now, we could avoid it by making sure that we don't have any tokens and then making the entity access the asset directly. But can you actually imagine the complications that can go through if we try to do that? You would have to create the identities for each of the entity on each of the assets, which is an operational overhead. It is not a very good user experience for the entity either when they try to assert, when they try to add their credentials for each of the assets they are accessing. And also, from a security perspective, this is not a very nice thing. So if you decommission an API, for example, or if you try to roll off a resource from a particular asset, you would have to actually, the administrators would have to actually log into each of the asset and then check where all the entities have their identities created, which is again a huge security. It's not good for the security. For example, if you miss one asset and the entity still has access to that asset, so we are not getting much out of it. The key thing is to make sure that we actually use the existing scenario, but establish conditions such that spoofed identities or credential harvesting does not really have that kind of impact on the environment. Now, typically, from this whole environment perspective, when we actually use tokens, bearer tokens, password hashes, we assume that the entity who has entered the environment is a trusted one, and that there is an implicit trust that is applied when the identity is asserted. This is what Zero Trust tries to address. So, not that the entity should not have access to asset B, but that the tokens, bearer tokens, password hashes are used, but we set conditions such that the entity is authorized, or the signals are actually consumed to ensure that the right entity at the right time, right place, from the right device is accessing asset B. That's what we call as the assessment of risk, and that we seek to replace binary decisions when an entity tries to access an asset. So when we talk about entities, it's not just about users, it's not just about APIs, it's about any entity that actually tries to access an asset, so programmatic or otherwise. Now, moving on, here is where I would like to encourage you to join our Zero Trust research group, wherein we do a lot of research from the identity pillar, and where Paul Simmons is a member of. And we did write a paper called Zero Trust Principles and Guidance for IAM. And the next set of slides that we have are actually leverage the information that we added to on that particular, the content that is a part of that particular paper. So we talked about identity and access management. And as Paul would like to say, it's identity, access management, and not identity and access management. Typically, the organization cannot protect what it cannot see. So one of the key things to ensure that we are leveraging identity to implement Zero Trust is to make sure that we are aware of what entities and attributes, entities have identities and what attributes they have in order to access resources. So the first step that we look at is identification of entities and attributes and make a database of it. So we have, heightened awareness to what sort of entities requesting access to resources. The next one is we talk about identity proofing and validation. Now, what it really means is that the signals that we actually obtain from identities and from other components like devices from where the identity is actually where the entity is asserting its identity, and then from the network from where the device has been connected to, and what time the entity is trying to access identity. So you look at all of that in terms of identity proofing and validation. Compare the signals to make sure that the conditions that the entity is trying to access the resource is within the risk acceptance levels. You remember we talked about the risk-based access for entities. So that's how we actually do, we do a risk assessment, because we need to have some level of inputs from the various components that are a part of allowing the entity to access a resource, and then make sure that the right entity is accessing the resource. So the signals for decision are typically based on Kipling's method, the 5W and 1H, that is what, when, who, why, where, what. And that's what we look at that in the next slide. And then we actually look at what sort of risk has been presented by consuming the signals, and does it actually align to the policy, and can the request be granted? If not, it needs to be denied. But how do we deal with the failed policy decision, and how do we deny the request, or do we acquire stronger signals? Because you see, sometimes administrators may work from remote locations, or they may also be a break glass scenario, and in which case they may want to use out of band access. So then at that point in time, the access cannot be denied. The access needs to be granted, but the organization would need to consume stronger signals. So this ties in with what Zero Trust says, that you authenticate and authorize or consume stronger signals before you grant access to an entity to access a resource. Okay. Now, this is, again, a part of what we worked on as a part of a paper, Zero Trust Principles and Guidance for IAM. This diagram was provided by our very good colleague, Hanny Roeder. And here is how you can see the Kipling method applied to consume signals in terms of who, what, when, where, why, and how. So you can see that the user IDs, device IDs, and service accounts are aligned to the who of the signals, and then the application ID, data source, etc. are aligned to the what. All I'm trying to illustrate with this diagram is that you can consume different signals for your risk-based assessment before granting or denying an access request. Now, the depth of the signals that is consumed by, with this policy definition is actually, it is dependent on the risk tolerance and on the risk appetite of the organization. The organization may choose to say they only want to look at who and what. They may not care about when, where, why, and how, which is perfectly okay, because you see, it's all based on the risk and the tolerance that the organization has in order to apply all the security. So ultimately, security should support business and not the other way around. So that's what we try to highlight in this paper. Also, I've added a little blurb over here. What a signal is just inputs that feed into the risk assessment, like user IDs and service ID, time limitation, etc. So why should we be thinking about leveraging identity for Zero Trust? First of all, it provides improved security. What Zero Trust together with identity provide is to ensure that authentication and authorization is conducted before a resource, before an entity tries to access resource. So it reduces the burden of actually doing all this manually. So it provides for improved security. It also provides for improved compliance, because many standards like ISO 27001 or PCI DSS or HIPAA, they actually look for proper, secure identity and access management. Now, whilst it is good to define as the process as secure identity and access management, I'm sure whoever is in compliance need to define how the standard works, the identity standard works, or the access control standard works, and putting together identity for Zero Trust will help you with your compliance. It also helps in reducing friction. You see, you're actually, you're not denying or granting access based on some assumptions. You're actually looking at the risk by consuming the signals from various sources within the environment, and then either you're approving or denying access. So it helps for reducing friction and increased agility as well. Because if you are trying to consume these kind of signals as a part of post facto from SIEM or from logging mechanisms, then you're actually impacting the user experience and delaying access that they need at the time that they need. So by making or feeding all these signals to a policy engine, it helps you in your agility and also increased productivity. So now, with all these combined together, if you're able to slow down, reduce the impact of breaches, then it helps in reduced costs, because as we all know, the cost of breach includes the direct breach and then also the ancillary costs in terms of fines and in terms of legal costs, etc. So by leveraging identity for our zero trust, we are moving from binary trust to zero trust. So we are trying to avoid implicit trust, wherein we implicitly trust an entity that has entered an environment, and we may not know, because this could be from stolen identities, stolen credentials, various other mechanisms. So that's where I would like to stop by providing this final thought about moving from binary trust to zero trust by leveraging identity. Okay, and these are our resources. The Zero Trust Principles and Guidance for IAM. If you're interested in joining us, please let us know, and then we'll add you to our working group and also to our regular meetings. Over to you, Sherry. How are we doing on time? Oh, well, I did well on time.
You were like spot on. Yeah, no, it's great. Thank you so much. Is there anything else, Shruti, you'd like to mention about the CSA, or anything else you'd like to add, as we've got some time? Or...
Oh, yes, absolutely. So the Zero Trust research group that we've got caters not just to identity pillar, but there are other pillars as well, which is aligned to the Zero Trust framework. So we have got pillar working groups for data, networks, applications, device, and of course, identity. Now, Zero Trust principles just do not talk about these 5 aspects. It also underpins them with automation and orchestration, and visibility and analytics and governance. So that, obviously, because when we align our environment or our organization to zero trust, and zero trust is not a standard, it is an approach, it is a framework, so it needs to be governed as well, and that's why we've got the underlying principle of governance to it. Also, I just want to reiterate that zero trust is not denying access for anything and everything. That's not the intention of zero trust. It's just to make sure that the implicit trust is avoided in order to address the breaches that regularly takes place. Also, zero trust does not say that breaches do not take place. It assumes that breach has taken place, and we are trying to either slow down, or we are trying to identify it in the right time, and make sure that we take the learnings from whatever we have seen and then apply it to the policies to strengthen our signals, and the next time make sure that we detect the breach in time. So this is what I had to add. Shireen, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you ever so much. Thank you for that, and thank you for the really good talk, and appreciate your time. And so this was talk number 5, and then on the next slide we've got a quick little preview of what's happening next week. So next week we're actually having a panel discussion. So everyone that you can see on screen is actually going to take part in that panel discussion, and we'll be talking about the future challenges and pitfalls with identity. So that's the last of the series, so do tune in for that. And you can catch up on our website. You can see a link to the identity series and identity in the cloud. So thank you ever so much. I think the last slide is for you. Just again, say a huge thank you to Shruti and everyone involved behind the scenes. Thank you ever so much. So Shruti, your details on LinkedIn as well. Fantastic. If anyone wants to contact you, that's great. Brilliant. All right then, guys. Thank you ever so much. And see you next week. Take care.
See you next week.
Bye.
Cheers.